Hey guys, it's Liv here, and in today's video, we're going to be we're going to be discussing all of the new Ruin Pokemon in VGC to find out what cores you guys should be using. If you guys enjoy this content and you want to see more, leave a like and subscribe, and answer the comment question of the day. What Ruin Pokemon are you guys most excited for in Regulation C? The personal favorite of mine is probably going to be Wo-Chien. I already am really looking forward to using this mon. I think it's a lot better than people give it credit for too, and I'll go over some cores for all these Pokemon so you guys can use them all successfully. Now, right off the bat, I'm just going to mention all of these Pokemon are going to be amazing. I genuinely do not think that even one of these Pokemon will be like a mid-tier Pokemon or like an underwhelming Pokemon. No, I think all four of these genuinely will be getting fairly used. I think all four of these will genuinely have a place on teams. I think you can even stack most of these with each other, to be honest. But I'm going to try and ignore duplicates for any core. So if I go over, let's say, for example, Fluttermane with one Pokemon, I'm not going to go over Fluttermane with another, though keep in mind it might still be useful with multiple of these. And in Fluttermane's case, spoilers, it will be, but I want to try and keep the examples as unique as possible, so that way then, of course, we do end up going for just a diverse list of options that you guys can have. Now, I will also mention that I'm going to go over the ruins in ABC order, so it's not the order that I think they'll be best to worst in, it's not the order I think worst to best, it's not the order of my favorite to least favorite, it's just an ABC order based on the ruins. So we're going to start off with Chien-Pao. Now, Chien-Pao will have the ability Beads of Ruin, which will drop the opponent's special defense down to 3/4 essentially. So it's only going to be 3/4 of the stat. So if it's at 300, it's only going to be 225 now. Just easy example right off the bat. For 200, it goes down to 150, and so on and so forth. So Chien-Pao will most likely want to pair with special attackers. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to pair with special attackers, but we have a lot of good special options actually, to where the examples that I'm going to mention all happen to be. Chien-Pao will benefit most from Pokemon that can either A, handle matchups such as Gastrodon so you can avoid Terra, or just other bulky waters, but Gastrodon is the one that comes to mind the most just because Gastrodon will typically be running stuff like Terra Fire to still keep resistance, whereas other waters like Dondozo you might be able to pressure them into something like a Terra Grass early in the game, and then clean them with Chien-Pao because they're forced to Terra. So at least in Chien-Pao's case, you're going to want something that can handle those really bulky waters, especially the ones that still Terra into resistances. And you're going to also want something that might benefit Chien-Pao, whether boosting its own fire attacks, whether just in general helping it offensively, or really whatever. So the first partner that we're going to look into for Chien-Pao would be Iron Bundle. Now, Iron Bundle offers a few different things. For one, this is a really good Icy Wind Pokemon. While you could definitely pair this with a good Tailwind option, I think that Bundle will be the best form of Speed Control for Chien-Pao, though Talonflame comes in a close second. I listed only Bundle here just because of the fact that I think that it will be the best Speed Control option, but this is also a really good way to pressure stuff like Gastrodon, Dondozo, and essentially force them to unfavorable Terras. For example, if I want to get around Gastrodon with Dondozo, I essentially need to Terra into something like a Terra Steel. It's really one of the only resistant Terras to Ice that isn't also going to get screwed over by water, which Terra Steel gets completely massacred by Chien-Pao. So these two offensively already provide a really strong core for each other just from that match alone, but you can also potentially force a really bad Terra for Gastrodon. Now, at the very least, Chien-Pao can still hit this thing really well with something like a Dark Pulse, so that's pretty good. But overall, Bundle and Chien-Pao do form a pretty nasty offensive core. It's really hard to switch around Fire and Ice. There's not really a lot of types that will allow you to do that. It's insane coverage already, and then when you add on Water and Dark to that combination, it's really hard to handle. With Bundle 2, it's one of the fastest Pokemon in the format, and it can even outpace Pokemon like, for example, Chien-Pao, which Chien-Pao could actually be a problematic Pokemon to a degree, considering the fact that you could get Sacred Sworded with Chien-Pao. So being able to just Icy Wind Chien-Pao and not only break a potential Focus Sash, but also just slow it down enough so Chien-Pao can kill it, it's going to be really useful in my opinion, and I think these two will benefit a lot from each other. Now, moving on to the next Chien-Pao partner, we have Fluttermane. Now, I'm sure this is the one that people saw a lot Series 1, and were like, oh my god, Chien-Pao Fluttermane? That's a really broken core. And you would be right. Chien-Pao Fluttermane does offer a lot to each other. For one, Fluttermane is a really great way to potentially stack this on a Sun team, which I'll get into the Sun partner in a little bit. But Fluttermane and Chien-Pao, obviously really amazing Sun partners. You can boost Fluttermane's speed and then use Chien-Pao to potentially drop special attack, and then just have Fluttermane become a really strong sweeper. This core would be a lot more focused on Fluttermane sweeping, as you could use Chien-Pao as a really bulky Pokemon to handle Pokemon such as opposing Fluttermane, maybe utilizing it as a Terrestrial pick, and then going for Dark Pulses into that slot, or even just Heat Waves, to be honest. You could also use this to handle options like King Gambit, for example, which King Gambit is a fairly strong sponge, and Chi would massacre that. Really, at that point, you would have to go for something like a Terra Water or like a Terra Dragon, but Flutterman would handle both those pretty easily, or at least as well for water sets as you would for just a non-Terra set. But even still, Chi also could still take advantage on an Assault Vest set for stuff like Ruination. Now, I don't think that Chi really runs Ruination for what it's worth, unless it's on Assault Vest, but it runs it more than Chien-Pao would, in my opinion. You'd probably be running more often than not something like Heat Wave, Overheat, Dark Pulse, and then one of Terra Blast or Ruination, depending on what your Terra type is. If you're going to go for something like the Stab, you're probably just going to go with Ruination, but if you're going to go for something like a Grass Terra, though, you're most likely going to go for Terra Blast. On non-Assault Vest sets, though, I think this is going to run Choice or AV, though I guess you could run Life Orb, and in that case, you'd probably go for Protect, but I feel like, or I guess Charcoal too. But realistically, though, I think AV and Choice are going to be the best sets on Chi-Yu, which means that Flutterman, of course, can run more of the Life Orb sets or like the Booster Energy sets and get some good mileage there. Overall, I think these two will be really good partners for each other. Not that I think they really patch a ton of offensive synergy necessarily, but just because I think that they're such offensive threats that really you do need to prepare. You do need to be prepared for these. Moving on to our final Chi-Yu partner, though, we have Torkoal. Now, Torkoal, I feel like, is the option that everyone kind of expected. Torkoal's actually been on the rise lately in Series 2 to begin with, and Series 3, while it will have some differences, there's not really anything that's going to threaten Torkoal outside of Ting-Lu. But even with Ting-Lu's case, at the very least, while it's dropping special attack, you could still pair this sort of Sun Core with something like a physical Paradox Pass Pokemon like a Great Tusk, and that would get a lot of mileage. So I think that Chi-Yu Sun teams are actually going to be super good. Realistically, any sort of partners that would mutually threaten both Torkoal and Chi-Yu, you could threaten with a Pass Paradox Pokemon. Something like a Sandy Shock, something like a Great Tusk. Great Tusk will probably be the best one on that. But ultimately, though, Sun is going to be a respectable aspect here. So I wanted to go over it with Chi-Yu. You're probably going to still see a lot of the just general quick... I think Quicklet Torkoal actually is a pretty cool innovation for the meta. Charcoal's still going to be decent. You could probably actually get some mileage out of Trick Room Chi-Yu, weirdly enough, just depending on how fast the meta trends. Though I will say with two of the defensive Paradox Pokemon being Ting-Lu and Wo-Chien both being significantly slower, I do think that there is some merit against running Chi-Yu on Trick Room, and instead maybe just going for like a Sun team that's really aggressive, and then having Torkoal just as a piece with like Yawn or something. But overall, though, Torkoal will still be decent. I think it's going to be, if nothing else, a really good way to make Chi-Yu into an offensive monster, and Torkoal will probably just, if anything, adapt support roles, but it'll still be a good partner nonetheless. Moving on, though, we do have the next pick, Chien-Pao. Now, Chien-Pao, I think, has the most versatile array of partners. Some things that we're looking for in Chien-Pao partners are, for one, Pokemon that would threaten Pokemon such as Rock types or potential Steel types. Steel types mostly because they're resisting Ice, and I think that Ice will be a really strong Terra on this. Meanwhile, for the Rock types, it's really just offensively handling this or fighting as well. So really just handling something that's going to either A, revenge Chien-Pao, or B, to handle Bulky Waters, because Bulky Waters, at the very least barring Ruination, would still most likely sponge. A lot of the waters currently in the format are fairly Fizz-Defs, like Nindozo or Gastrodon, so similar to Chi-Yu, you probably do want to clear those, though at least in Gastrodon's case, Ice is neutral, so it's not as big of a deal as Fire would be. So one of the first partners we're going to look into for Chien-Pao would be none other than Dragonite. Now, Dragonite is going to be really valuable here, if nothing else, because of Terra Flying. Terra Flying Dragonite will be insane. Now, I will say with this Pokemon in particular, you're still going to struggle with your Nindozo matchups, but essentially the goal with Dragonite would be to try and take advantage of a Terra, really just taking advantage of Terra Nindozos. Essentially with partners here, we're going to want to look into things that would handle really just good Nindozo checks. For example, Dragonite will be great for Terra Grass Nindozo here, as well as Terra Dragon. So you'd be able to essentially use Dragonite as the check to those. But you could still Terra into a type that would maybe be pressuring stuff like Water Nindozo. Dragonite, weirdly enough, actually gets a really fast move pool. You could utilize this as a mix attacker, for example. But overall, I think that these two, if nothing else, will take advantage of more than anything the Terra Normal Bandit sets. Now, being able to just spam Bandit E-Speed will be really difficult for teams. Really, this core essentially prides on Dragonite using priority as hard and as fast as possible. So it's one of those things that it's kind of unique to the Chien-Pao rule, where typically you'd look for a check for for a lot of Chien-Pao's counters. However, in Dragonite's case, it's just taking advantage of the fact that it's going to hit really hard, really fast, and drop Fizz-Def. So Dragonite is kind of the one exception here to typical Chien-Pao partners, but it is an option that I'm sure a lot of people will be looking to run just because of how sought after this core has been, for lack of a better word. Though I do think there's a better option for this, something that handles Chien-Pao's checks a little bit better, something that isn't as weak to rock, and that is none other than Palafin. Now Palafin I think will actually just be the better version of this. We've seen Palafin actually being a really strong option on Rain already in Series 2, and I think that this only helps more in Series 3. For one, Palafin is a really great way around stuff like Ting-Lu and also the Chi-Yu, which is already pretty good. Dragonite didn't really help a lot with any sort of matchups against Paradox, against Ruin Mons besides Wo-Chien with Terra Flying. But again, you'd really be running that core for Terra Normal for the Bandit E-Speed. So Palafin already is just doing a better job at that role. Number 2, though, is that Palafin actually benefits a lot from Chien-Pao. Being able to clear stuff like, for example, bulky grasses that would otherwise sponge Palafin would be really beneficial here. So I think that already this is going to be a really strong partnership, where essentially Chien-Pao is the one benefiting Palafin here, which does still work a lot really well. Chien-Pao can actually run some good support options for this too. Stuff like Ruination, this is probably the only partner I would really consider running it on, but also Icy Wind. Icy Wind could be a great slot for this, actually, as it would allow Palafin to essentially wave crash more, which could be really beneficial as Palafin would typically be jet punching otherwise, and having the Icy Wind on this moveset would be very beneficial here. You could also go for stuff like Taunt, for example, and at least pressure stuff like Gastrodon and then run a Terra on Palafin to maybe check Gastrodon. But overall, though, you do have a lot of options, and these two, offensively speaking, do offer a lot to each other, to where while Chien-Pao is definitely benefiting Palafin more than Palafin is benefiting Chien-Pao, I do still think you're going to get a lot of mileage out of this, so I do think that realistically this is an amazing core that you could use on your team. The final one I want to go over is none other than Brute Bonnet. Now, Brute Bonnet essentially does have the benefit of just making sure that you can put a lot of pressure on a lot of Chien-Pao's checks. For example, this is an amazing check to Dondozo. With a loaded dice spread in tandem with something like a Clear Smog, for example, you could probably utilize this to try and just beat Dondozo as quickly and efficiently as possible with the loaded dice. To be fair, you don't really need Clear Smog, but it is a nice added benefit here. And essentially, you would also use this as an offensive check to stuff like, for example, rock types, and with Terra, you could still while fighting. I would recommend going for something either like a Terra Flying, for example, as a good fighting wall, while still not really being weak to any previous weaknesses other than Ice. But more importantly, I would probably utilize this as a Terra Poison set. While you do become ground weak for Dondozo matchups, at the very least, for any ground Dondozos, you would have Chien-Pao, and by Clear Smogging, of course, you will pressure that even easier for the Dondozo matchups. But also on top of that as well, Dondozo typically isn't, it's not exactly a common move on Dondozo to run Earthquake, albeit it's used enough, but for example, when you're obviously playing with a Chien-Pao Bonnet partnership, you don't even need to necessarily Terra Bonnet to begin with, so you could utilize this obviously against Dondozo as a non-Terra option, and then partner this with, of course, your Chien-Pao, kill the Dozo, and then use Chien-Pao as a win con, which I think will be more importantly what this will do. You'll probably use this as a really good support piece for Sword Stance Chien-Paos actually, because you do have the magical move Rage Powder in your moveset, as well as Spore, which both of these will be really easily able to allow Chien-Pao to set up, and I think ultimately this will be really useful. Chien-Pao will be especially great in terms of handling flying types for Brute Bonnet, as you could always just go for stuff like Ice Shard or Icicle Crash, and I think that this will be a really strong way to just offensively pressure a lot of Bonnet's checks. And ultimately, I do think that the synergy here, despite being two dark types, will be worthwhile running both these Pokemon together. So ultimately, I highly recommend the Brute Bonnet Chien-Pao core. I think that while a lot of people are going to seek priority options here, that Bonnet is still something to definitely consider on a team, and I think that will offer a lot to that Chien-Pao slot if you're looking for something. Obviously, Amoonguss can do the similar job as well, but Bonnet also benefits from Chien-Pao dropping physical defense, so by going for Bullet Seed sets, obviously with the loaded dice, I think that Bonnet will have slightly better synergy, though Amoonguss obviously will still be a phenomenal partner here. Let's move on to Ting-Lu though. Now Ting-Lu I think will benefit a lot more from these really bulky options. I think that while Chien-Pao and Chi-Yu will definitely benefit from a lot more glass cannons that can still take on more bulky options, Ting-Lu I think will be more appreciative of a lot of the tanky Pokemon. That's not to say you can't run Prayer Pokemon such as Fluttermane, for example, but obviously with Vessel of Ruin dropping special attack, Fluttermane specifically might not be the best choice, though I could see this stacking with Chien-Pao, for example, as a really good grass clear. Though outside of the Ruin Pokemon, I do think we have a lot of good options. Personally, I think this one will probably be the best though. I think it's going to essentially become the Landorus of our format until we really do get an actual Landorus here. With the Dark and Ground typing, it's an amazing type. I think we could use this as Terra Poison, for example, and be a really good offensive piece as well as a good defensive piece. Really, the only lacking area is Spadef, but you could easily just throw on an Assault Vest and pair this, or even just go with something like a Wo-Chien Ting-Lu core, and that would also help out a lot. Essentially, Ting-Lu is probably the one you would most likely stack into a second Ruin Pokemon here, in my opinion, and I think it's going to easily be the one that you're going to see on a majority of teams. It will be the easiest to run, in my opinion, because realistically, you're either just going to run AV or just going to go with leftovers. You're definitely going to throw on Earthquake, you're going to definitely throw on Ruination. I think you'll probably throw on Rock Slide, and then fourth move can really be whatever, whether it's, I've seen Fisher on the Moxie boosted suggested set, that was pretty clever, but also stuff like Terra Blast, Taunt, you could go with Protect, you could go with a lot of different things, I think, in my opinion. Even Body Press might not be too terrible as a really good check to something like, I don't know, there's not really a Pokemon you'd actually need Body Press for, maybe just opposing Darks, I guess. But overall, I think this one will definitely be the best. It has the most options going for it. I forgot to go over suggested sets for Chien-Pao, but realistically, this is Swords Answer Band. You're going to go with either Choice Band or Focus Sash as the item. That's really it. But for Ting-Lu, though, you have a lot of different items, whether it's berries, Assault Vest, leftovers, etc. Ting-Lu will definitely be the most versatile. Now, for partners, I think the first one and the most likely partner is going to be Arcanine. I think these two offer a lot of good synergy. For one, Ting-Lu helps Arcanine by taking special hits better, while Arcanine will help Ting-Lu taking physical ones even easier, despite having already an obnoxious Phys-Def stat, because of the Intimidate you'll provide. Not only this, but Arcanine also has some incredible support with both Will-O-Wisp and also Snarl on your movesets, which will help Ting-Lu significantly. On top of this, Flare Blitz will help a lot with different grass and ice types that would otherwise try and pressure Ting-Lu. So already, these two offer probably one of the best cores that we have in this entire list. Not only this, but Arcanine is also just in general an amazing support piece. You could pair this with like a Terra Grass set and then go for Helping Hand plus Earthquake into the Ting-Lu. Which with the Helping Hand Arcanine, we haven't actually seen it a lot this format, but I do think that Ting-Lu is a pretty decent partner for it, as it's already a really good tank, and you could use this with Terra Grass Arcanine, keep your health up pretty high, and then just go for really good Earthquake spam. Which I think on this Pokemon in particular could be pretty beneficial. 110 attack is definitely nothing to sneeze at, and with the Terra Ground set, you could also maybe just in general not go for Helping Hand and instead swap on Protect, and still get some similar rolls to Garchomp while just being a lot bulkier than Garchomp would have been. But overall, I do think this will be a pretty decent team, at least as far as a comp goes. Moving on though, we do have a couple other really good Ting-Lu partners. For one, Garganacl. Garganacl helps a lot more with what Ting-Lu is really weak to. Specifically, this would be used to clear different water types for Ting-Lu, as well as potentially clear different stuff like Corviknight, for example, which would be Steel Flying, which could at least get around Ting-Lu other than Ruination. Overall, Garganacl is just a pretty good sponge. It's a really good Pokemon that benefits a lot from Ting-Lu dropping special attackers, as typically you're seeing Garganacl be a really good Phys-Def wall. But imagine Garganacl where you're already struggling to KO it as it is, but now the special attackers can't even do as much damage to it. Feels kind of broken to me personally. Well, broken might not be the right word, but it's definitely seeming like a really good core, and especially with Arcanine also being a really good pressure for grasses for Garganacl, I think these three in particular will be a really good core together. But obviously for duos, Garganacl and Ting-Lu will still be an amazing one. We've seen Garganacl be an incredible piece all season 2, and I think at series 3 really nothing will actually hurt the usage, because the best Pokemon for this would be like a Terra Chi-Yu, because Terra Grass Chi-Yu could threaten both pre and post Terra with Terra Blast Grass plus the Dark Pulse, as typically really the best way I guess that Garganacl would have to handle that would be like a Terra Poison set. But even still, Terra Poison now is neutral to fire, so at least you're getting rid of the resistance to fire that you would have with the pre-Terra Rock typing. And on top of that as well, Chi-Yu could obviously just pair on a Sun Team for that, or just throw on a really good ground type on the archetype. Something like a Great Tusk, for example, which would be an amazing way to break through this if it is Terra Poison. Or even just an opposing psychic type, something like, for example, Indeedee or Armarouge, or even just some sort of other psychic type in general. I'm not really sure what psychics we'll see in particular, but really that'd be the best way to deal with Garganacl. But keep in mind, all of those are special attackers, and Ting-Lu will benefit a lot for helping Garganacl with those. So ultimately, I do think that Garganacl will be amazing on these sort of comps. The final mon I do have to suggest here, though, is none other than Iron Hands. I think specifically the offensive Iron Hands, stuff like a Sword Stance or Belly Drum set, will benefit a lot from Ting-Lu. Ting-Lu will be able to help a lot with essentially making sure that Iron Hands is taking less on the special side to accommodate for something like an Assault Vest that you would have otherwise normally ran, which I think will honestly be incredibly helpful for Iron Hands. We'll probably see this again similar to Arcanine with like the Terra Grass sets to just sponge Earthquake a bit, so Ting-Lu is a little bit less restricted in what it's clicking. But overall, though, I think that Ting-Lu Iron Hands will still be an incredible core. Iron Hands is going to be great for handling the dark types it would threaten, as well as ice types, or even just bulky waters. Really, besides like Dondozo, for example, you would be able to handle the majority of them with this core. And versus Dondozo, at the very least, you could go for like a Terra Grass Ting-Lu or like a Terra Fairy Ting-Lu, and just go for like a taunt sort of set, and then just try and stall break it with Ruination plus Thunder Punch on Iron Hands, and that would be a pretty decent way for you to actually break past the core. But ultimately, though, I do think that Iron Hands will be an appreciated partner for Ting-Lu. I don't know if it'll be the best one, but I think it's a lot more of an offensive piece than Arcanine and Garganacl, and I wanted to show that there were still some really good offensive partners for this sort of Pokemon. Finally, though, we have Wo-Chien. Now, I think that Wo-Chien will be most appreciated on sort of stalls, stuff like, for example, Perish Trap and other just generally more defensive archetypes, but I do still think that these will be a very appreciated set of archetype in this format. We've already seen that Wolfie's Perish Trap team, for example, won a regional in one of the most offensive formats we've had. And on top of this as well, obviously with Wo-Chien, it's still going to appreciate a lot of other Pokemon that are very viable right now, stuff like Gothitelle, for example, or really just in general a lot of other good special attackers. With this thing's ability, of course, you're dropping physical attack stats, so we do want to look at special attackers in most cases, though again, there's not really any rule that says we can't run a physical Pokemon. I think though that we have enough that could be really viable special Pokemon here to partner with this. Typically with Wo-Chien, I think that Terra Fairy is going to be our best typing, though obviously we could use this with stuff like Terra Poison, for example, which could give us a resistance to Fairy. We have stuff like Terra Fire, which could be a really good option to threaten potentially Trick Room cores like Armourouge, for example, as typically Armourouge could still actually muscle past you with just Armor Cannon, but by going for Terra Fire or even Terra Water as well, you could pressure those cores very well. As pre-Terra, you would handle the Expanding Force, and post-Terra with Fire or Water, you would be able to wall Armor Cannon and Heat Wave. So Wo-Chien, I think, will definitely benefit from a lot of different Terras. I think Fairy will be the best, but then it's going to go like Poison and then Fire and Water. Realistically, this is going to go for essentially like a Celesteela roll with like Leech Seed. You're going to go for Ruination. But you also do have a benefit that Celesteela never had. Same as Ferrothorn even, where you also have stuff like Taunt, which could be really good to stall break with Ruination and Leech Seed. And for the last move, I think you have a lot of different options. You can go for stuff like Knockoff, which is great for removing berries, leftovers, Assault Vest, etc. But you could also utilize this with options such as Foul Play. You could go with stuff like Giga Drain, for example. You could even go with Pollen Puff, which is great team support. This thing has a lot of different options in its move pool. Taunt's not necessarily a required move for what it's worth. You could throw on Protect over that as well. But Ruination and Leech Seed, I think, will definitely be the best cases for this. Now, as far as partner Pokemon go, you're going to want to look at Gothitelle. I think Gothitelle will ultimately be the best partner for this. With Shadow Tag, essentially, you could trap in different poisons, you could trap in different fighting types, and Gothitelle is a really amazing Terra Pokemon. Overall in this format, despite the fact that we've gotten 4 new dark types, I think the fact that Gothitelle can easily just tear around them and put on a lot of pressure still will be ultimately very appreciated. You could pair this thing in tandem with the Gothitelle Wo-Chien cores with really good special fairies, and I think you'll get a lot of mileage out of this. Speaking of some really good special fairies, we have Screamtail. Now Screamtail, despite the fact that its offenses are equal, this would be a special fairy in this core. I know a lot of people are running Screamtail with Play Rough, but I think that Gleam is still going to be an appreciated option here. Though you could obviously also still go with options such as Play Rough, and your damage is so negligible it's fine. Ultimately though, you're going to probably want to run this for the Perish Trap set more than anything, as Perish Song will be a very appreciated option, with Snarl Wo-Chien also on this sort of comp specifically being a very appreciated partner for Screamtail and in general Perish Trap to begin with. Essentially this core would provide itself on making sure that you can never KO it first, because these two Pokemon would be so bulky for each other, with Wo-Chien having Sustain as well as Screamtail having the move Wish, which I think this will be one of the only instances where Wish Screamtail will be a truly menacing Pokemon to play against. But essentially on the Wo-Chien Screamtail core, you're just making sure that your opponent can never actually successfully KO you. So Screamtail in this case would probably want to run something like a Mental Herb, or maybe even just a Taunt, for example. And then either way, you're going to want to go with Perish Song, Wish, Protect, and then probably some sort of attack, though you could also go with Taunt in this slot. Essentially though, with this core, you're essentially making sure that the opponent can never take you out. You really don't have a reason to actually go for damage with the Screamtail Wo-Chien core, because your opponent in theory wouldn't have a really viable way to actually KO both your Pokemon. Between Protect, Perish Song, Leech, Snarl, Wish, whatever, you really would never actually end up getting KO'd very easily. It would take a lot to actually really pressure you. So this would definitely be a fairly strong partner in my opinion, and especially with Gothitelle, you could pull off a ton of shenaniganry. Now for the final Pokemon, and I think actually this partners not only well with just Wo-Chien in general, but with all 3 of these other Pokemon. And you could really make a really destructive core with these, being Volcarona. Now, Amogus is another option you could definitely consider here, but I wanted to go over Volcarona because I think it does provide at least a somewhat offensive piece to parish teams, as well as some stuff like redirection, for example. Now, Volcarona, I think, will definitely take on a really good role both offensively and defensively here. You can go for sets with like Rage Powder, but you could also go with Quiver Dance sets. You could probably even make both work in general, to be honest, and essentially use Volcarona, Quiver Dance, and Rage Powder to draw in special attackers, while having Wo-Chien just really quickly leech stall them as well down. And then you have stuff like Heat Wave and Giga Drain, for example, or Bug Buzz, or Protect that you could throw on over either one of these moves or just in the extra slots. Ultimately, though, Volcarona will probably be an amazing Terra option with stuff like Terra Water, Terra Grass. You could also go with Terra Fairy. I've seen that going around a bit, and it would help a lot with all the dark types you're getting. You could also even just go with Terra Fire, which would be decent if you were to try and run this on a more offensive build. But I don't think Volcarona really needs to do that for what it's worth. I think that Volcarona is bulky enough, and it's going to benefit enough defensively from Wo-Chien to where you really just don't need to care about the fact that you're doing a lot of damage, because essentially your role here would truly be just a support piece and then to clean teams with Quiver Dance in the very late game when everything is so obnoxiously chipped down. Ultimately, though, you would use this to try and handle stuff like ice types and also grass types that Wo-Chien would maybe struggle a little bit against. For grass types is because you can't leechy them, and for ice types is because they handle you really well offensively. But ultimately, though, I do think that you get a lot of mileage out of this at the very least, and I think the Volcarona will be a really decent offensive partner if you're looking for something that's a little less stall-oriented. But ultimately, though, that's going to be our list for today. Now, again, while there's a lot of other options that can be considered here, these were just some of my opinions. I tried to keep the list entirely unique. So, for example, you might have success running Fluttermane in another core that's not Chi related, or you might have success running Volcarona in a core that's not Wo-Chien related. I'm sure that's going to be the case for a lot of you guys, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot of options down below. But comment what cores and what Ruin Pokemon you're looking forward to using the most, and if you enjoyed this and you want to see more content like this, leave a like on the video and make sure you subscribe, as it's the best way to stay up to date on future content. I'll be bringing a ton of Series 3 content both ahead of and during Series 3, or I guess Regulation C for that matter. So make sure, of course, you stay tuned for that. With that said, shoutouts to channel members being Josh K Ultra Player, Mia, Zeke Zero, Matt O'Shea, and BBat. Your guys' support is greatly appreciated, and if you want to become a channel member, it's a couple dollars a month, and you're gonna get bonus videos twice a month. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, peace out, guys.